researcher for the last couple of decades into this topic. He has a lot of presentations on YouTube. He has his own website, What on Earth is Happening. You may want to write that down because he goes into a lot more topics than just natural law, but it is the basis of his work. And I wanted to spend an hour presenting that. You may want to look this up on YouTube for yourself because it will explain a lot more than I'm capable of doing in 1 hour, because it is a 9-hour seminar, which I have condensed. Now, the slideshow is with permission from Mark. So, with that, we're going to get rolling and move right into it. Since I'm blind as a bat, I will need these. All right, I think that works pretty well. We're going to talk about the role of knowledge. Since human beings as a species do not already have the things they say they want, it follows logically that knowledge of the requirements to obtaining the things that they say they want either must be absent or, if present, that knowledge must be willfully being ignored. As long as this knowledge continues to remain unknown or ignored, the manifestation of the desired conditions will be impossible. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about occult knowledge. It's not a spooky subject. I'm going to explain what that word means because it's been mistranslated by just about everyone in modern society. The word occult is derived from the Latin adjective occultus, which just means hidden, which comes from the Latin verb occultare, which means to hide, conceal, or to keep secret, okay? So there is no good information or bad information. The problem that humanity is facing is that the people that hold that information is using it against us. And the only way this playing field is ever going to get leveled is if the rest of humanity wakes up and becomes knowledgeable on certain key aspects of this information. Now, occult knowledge constitutes both the knowledge of human consciousness and how it operates, and the knowledge of natural law, which are the unseen spiritual principles which govern the consequences of human behavior. Such knowledge is not commonly known because it has been deliberately hidden in order to create and maintain a power differential between those who hold that information and those who are ignorant of it. The knowledge of natural law and its operations constitutes the most deeply occulted information on earth, which the powers that be seek to keep hidden from the people of earth at all costs, because its understanding would level the playing field and put an end to the currently entrenched control systems. So, we're going to talk about where our freedom went, because I think everybody's interested in that topic. Everybody here is, sure, advised of the situation that humanity is a slave race living on a prison planet. And although we can basically describe the cage, we can describe all of the aspects of our imprisonment very well, almost nobody actually asks this particular question, and it is key. I'm somewhat of a professional problem solver, so a lot of this came naturally to me. But I understand that for most people, it's going to be challenging. The main ways to solve a problem is, first, you have to recognize that there is a problem. Now, a fear-based denial of the problem must first be dealt with and conquered. That is particularly challenging in current events. Recognize that the symptoms are nearly the effects of underlying causes. Therefore, instead of simply treating symptoms, make an accurate diagnosis of the causes of the problem, okay? Humanity is pretty much being presented with nothing but symptoms, and it's something to focus on and say, oh, I gotta change this, or I gotta change that, let's vote the moms out, or, delete one particular institution and not deal with it, boycott and things like that. It's never looking at the actual cause. That's the premise that I'm working with. Okay, through the knowledge acquired via accurate diagnosis, we take the required actions necessary to rectify the causal factors which have led to the manifestation of the problem. Now, we're going to start challenging some beliefs. A lot of this, quite frankly, isn't going to resonate with everyone here because I am taking on literally many, many generations of brainwashing. So everything that you hold to be true may not necessarily be it. So if you do your own research and start challenging your own beliefs, you will find the answers. This is very important. Now, truth, believe it or not, is something that is actually objective, okay? We've been taught pretty much everybody has their own truth, and that's not true. That is actually perception, which can get changed by all kinds of circumstances, which I will explain. But truth is objective, meaning that it is not based on the perceptions of human beings, which is capable of wavering, sometimes quite a bit. Truth is simply that which is. It is that which has occurred in the past and that which is occurring in the present. Now, that which is. I want to give you like a little chart to understand what I'm talking about, to visualize it. Imagine that these white lines are the truth, okay? And the wavy lines that I said is perception, capable of wavering, okay? Now, if you have a relatively low, uninformed consciousness type person, or we could say low vibration, then their perception will intersect with the truth very rarely, but it, just for the basis of this, visualization, at a low frequency, you do not cross the truth very often. If you raise your vibration, your knowledge, your perception, okay, you will wind up with a higher frequency, which means that your perceptions will intersect the truth with far more frequency. And then at the top line, as you can see as this goes, you wind up with more and more intersections with the truth. The more that you learn, the more that you grow, the more that you actually spiritually evolve. And that is what we're working on here today. There are a lot of obstacles, though, to perception. And one of the biggest ones that I've come across is that anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and do not want to be true. This is highly relevant because the powers that be are feeding all kinds of scenarios, which I've labeled as hopium. Okay, something to hang your hat on and say, okay, this is how it's going to work out. Bottom line is, if you don't do anything, somebody else will solve the problem for you, and that is a trap. And that's what I'm going to address here. Now, it's important to work with something that you know what I'm talking about when I say natural law, all right? A lot of people just assume that it's Darwinism, and nothing could be further from the truth. I want to define the terms. Natural, it's inherent. It has a basis in nature, reality, and truth. It's not made or caused by mankind. The law is an existing condition which is binding and immutable. It cannot be changed. So a working definition for the rest of this, just so you know, is that natural law is a universal, non-man-made, binding, and immutable conditions that govern the consequences of human behavior. That is a mouthful, but you gotta look at that carefully. Natural law is a body of universal spiritual laws which act as the governing dynamics of consciousness. Okay? Think in terms of karma, because we're going to be dealing with a lot of it in the near future. Now, I am basically an explorer, and I learn through discovery. And I think that is actually key. And that's versus belief. I've always challenged the official narrative since I was a little kid. And it's made me a person that I do not readily accept official narratives. As a matter of fact, when the latest book came out, I knew the whole thing was bullshit. But I also knew what the agenda was. But let's get back to discovery versus belief. The key part of this is you've got a picture of a gentleman that doesn't believe in gravity. The lesson is that belief is irrelevant. It holds no bearing on natural law and its principles. Okay, Human belief is completely irrelevant when it comes to the existence and operation of natural laws, just as it is irrelevant in relation to any of the laws of nature, such as gravity, inertia, momentum, thermodynamics, or electromagnetism. Similar to such other phenomena in nature, the workings of natural law require no belief in order for them to be discovered and known. That's where you gotta get that your beliefs are irrelevant. You need to do your own research, that's so you know what reality is. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true, and the other is to refuse to accept what is true. Now, our current problems that we're dealing with in this world have a lot to do with the fact that we've been propagandized for thousands of years. And this is the part where I'm going to explain, at least to a huge extent, how this works. I have greatly simplified neuroscience just for the purpose of getting to the point of what I'm trying to explain here, because it's going to be essentially what's holding the system up, namely human enslavement. The human brain. The neocortex of the brain has two hemispheres. You have the left brain hemisphere that largely facilitates logical and scientific thought, while the right brain hemisphere largely facilitates creativity, compassion. When both hemispheres are in balance, the neocortex acts in its proper role as the executive command center of the human brain, and true intelligence and intellect and creativity is born. Okay? That would be in a perfect world, but it doesn't happen that often. If a human being's left brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, this R complex will take over executive function of the brain, and that would be like the brain stem, or some people call it the reptilian brain. Okay. What this will do will manifest selfishness and base desires, and develop a personality based in domination and control. Now, if they can get everybody to use, or a lot of people to use, the right hemisphere of the brain, what happens is the limbic system takes over. That would be the mammalian brain, the middle brain, okay? And that is all emotion. So the person would become ruled by their emotions and develop a personality based in submissiveness and naivety. Now here's how this game is played. You'll notice that the left brain, primarily intellect, we will call it the masculine side of the brain, because everything has gender, which we will get to. But it has characteristics such as rigid skepticism, scientism, atheism, solipsism, which is, if you don't know what that means, there's a long explanation, but it basically means extreme self-centeredness. Okay. Moral relativism, social Darwinism, eugenics, and authoritarianism. Okay? This is what happens when the left part of the brain is chronically dominant. It's the only part being used. Now, if we go to the right side, this will lead to naivety, blind belief, religious extremism, again, self-centeredness, unworthiness, self-loathing, order following, or a willing slave. Now, the most important thing to understand here is that in between the two hemispheres is something called the corpus callosum. It's where the two sides of the brain communicate with each other. But if you're only using one side of the brain, and a lot of people do, you lose that communication, all right? Which greatly limits you. Now we're going to look at a worldview schism, because this plays out and you can see it everywhere. The left side brain guys, well, they think it's all random. The universe is just a grand accident. There is no creator, therefore there is no underlying intelligence in nature. There is no such thing as spiritual, moral, or natural law. Existence has no purpose other than to continue to exist. And on the other side, we have determinism. God controls everything in creation. All occurrences are preordained. Free will is an illusion and does not exist. And since God controls everything, change is impossible. Action is ultimately meaningless. These are the hallmarks of religious extremism and self-think. And I want you to look at the bottom word on both sides, okay? You have totalitarianism on the left, and you have slave-think on the right. Now we're at the core of how the system works. The powers that be don't really care which side you land on. It's just important that you land on one side or the other, so you have the people imposing enslavement, and you have the people that are willing slaves. That's how it's all structured. Now, they have provided with us boxes for consciousness, all right? And I have focused on all of these at one time or another in my life. And I have seen the results in my life, and they're not good. But the top left box, I've also arranged these so you've got pretty much the left side, which feeds that domination, and you've got the right side. What we have been provided for is politics, yes. You need to know the Hegelian dialectic in that I'm sure a lot of people have realized that it doesn't matter whether you worship the elephant or the jackass, both routes lead to human enslavement. It's really that simple. Also, we have underneath that scientism, and I want to specify, I'm not talking about science. I'm talking about an institution that's completely captured by the powers that be. It will finance whatever it needs to further the control of humanity, and it will not finance whatever somebody comes up with that would actually help humanity. And I had noticed this when I was a teenager, when I was working on fuel systems, energy systems, that I knew, originally I thought, ooh, I could become a trillionaire if I could ever get this to market. Upon learning how the system actually works, I realized that's actually impossible in the current climate. Okay, I know personally a lot of scientists that are dead because they tried to bring things to market. The rest of them are sitting in a cage somewhere because they broke the law. And it would be the law of physics. Okay. If you familiarize yourself with the work of a man named Rupert Sheldrake, he has a YouTube video where 10 different laws of physics he has identified as they are just theories and easily disprovable. However, when you go to academia, all the way up to the doctorate level, these theories are taught as laws. And that's why a lot of what's going on around us can't be explained. And they might be called acts of God or something along those lines. No, it's actually science. It's just science that isn't shared with the rest of us. Now we're going to go over to the right side of the brain. This is where I get on spooky territory because I know I will offend people's sensibilities with this. But this box of consciousness is all the cultural religions. It's either originally designed from the natural law principles and have been subverted over the eons, or some of them were just invented as control systems. Now, for anybody that doesn't fall into one of those religions, they have also provided for us the New Age movement, which they say is not a religion, but it is. This is also designed to keep us out of the way. It's just to have something to focus on. It does actually create a system of beliefs where the person will sit there, meditate, as the picture says, and nothing happens that would get in the way of the powers that be. That's pretty much what it's designed to do. One thing that I would recommend is on the same website or YouTube channel that I started with. There is a video called New Age Bullshit, where 20 specific beliefs are challenged, okay? And you do need to listen to that, even if you have nothing to do with New Age, because it pervades most of society. It is taught within all the 12-step programs for starters. And so there's a lot of people falling into this ideology that doesn't know where it came from. And it has to be looked at. But we're going to look at a lot of them. Now, the most important false belief system is right here in the middle. Okay, the powers that be have convinced all of us that these pretty little pieces of paper are worth something. Well, yeah, we have to either produce something of value, or we have to perform a service that somebody else will pay for in order to collect these little green pieces of paper. okay? It is just a control system. The powers that be do not have to work for this, all right? They just print it up. It's a game to them. So I'm challenging all of this. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about nature versus nurture. And I will get a little bit blasphemous in this also, because we've taught, at least when I grew up, that human nature is somewhat evil. And there are other religions that say that human nature is angelic. All right? Well, I've since believed that neither is true. You can follow one or the other, but the bottom line is human nature is neither inherently good nor inherently evil. Instead, we should consider the operating conditions or the environment which human beings exist, which influences behavior to a great extent, thus creating the current human condition. All right, think of it almost like human beings are programmable. Okay, that's why when you turn the TV, you have programming. That's what it's for. We've all been programmed since we were infants. And so were our parents and our grandparents. So this, you can't just hold the, one particular generation responsible for this. Now, using that as a computer analogy, I'm going to get back to that, but this is actually the most important slide that I've got here. And it is how our reality is built. Now, we start with available information. Okay? This constitutes potential knowledge that may be gathered, processed, understood, and acted upon by individuals. Okay? As a researcher myself, I even explore a lot of genres that I don't necessarily agree with. I follow a lot of researchers where I can easily point out where they're just flat out wrong, but their research is good, all right, in their particular field. Their conclusions, I may draw a different conclusion, all right? But I would take every precept on its own and see if it stands by itself. I never take a package deal, okay? Like, for example, a religious dogma that goes from one end to the other, and you have to get every precept or you're a heretic, or a political party that has all of their different precepts, and this is what we stand for. You gotta say, no, don't take the package deal. Take each one, evaluate it, okay? Quickly you will find you don't agree with any of these systems because they've got these little bugaboos built into them that help our control system, okay? Not us. All right. Now, after you've gone through that process, it's a decision-making process. These processes take place in the human mind and are chosen by each individual based upon available information. This leads to understanding, or the lack thereof, depending on your knowledge. Okay, and then finally you have human behavior. Each individual's behavior is based upon the quality of their decision-making processes, which in turn is based on the quality of the available information. This leads to wisdom. Now notice, wisdom is a behavior. It is not information. Okay? And how this is built together, you can have wisdom or the lack thereof. And you can lead a good life, or you can be hopelessly confused and led around by somebody else. This is the big difference that I'm talking about right now. These three steps were originally called the trivium in a liberal arts education. That hasn't been taught in many decades because they're obsessed with teaching you what to think and not how to think. This should be on everybody's refrigerator, just so you can actually know what the steps are, and integrate them into your person. Now we have a manifested reality. How our reality is built? Well, the quality and conditions which manifest in any society is based upon the aggregate or the total quality of human behavior within that society. You will have a generated result, which is order or chaos. That's how reality is built. Now, I want to just touch on the principles of natural law. This is a science, ladies and gentlemen, and as a mad scientist and inventor, I've gone into this genre through trying to discover what Nikola Tesla was working on. Just so you know, my background. I wanted to reproduce a lot of this. And he violated basically a whole bunch of laws of physics. So I knew he was working with another law of physics. This is what it is right here. We've got mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. All right? There is a book which I would encourage anyone to read that's actually interested in this. It's called the Kybali. It is published in Kybali. K-Y. I will answer questions at the end. It's published in 1908 by the Three Initiates. You can find about 10 different versions of this audio book on YouTube. It's also available for purchase through Amazon, all right? It's basically a science manual on how the universe works. So, and it also contradicts anything you might have heard in academia. All right, we're going to look at a couple of these because it relates quite specifically to my topic. Mentalism, that's the first one. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Thoughts lead to the manifestation of things and events. Thoughts create our state of existence and the quality of our experience here on earth. Therefore, you have to be responsible for everything that we create by being responsible for everything that we think. Bottom line is all a mental construct, okay? Matter and spirit are actually one and the same. They're just something operating at different vibrations. This is very key when you're trying to understand how our life gets constructed. Also, if you've looked at get to it. I'm not blanking, I just move on. Okay, the second one is correspondence, which above is like that which is below, that which is below is like that which is above. Or the macrocosm, the very large of totality, and the microcosm, the very small, or the individual units which comprise the whole, are reflections of each other. The universe is holographic. It is self-similar across all scales. Okay? It can also be described as fractal. So if you think in terms of subatomic particles that build an atom looks a lot like a solar system. Solar system looks a lot like a galaxy, onward and onward. It doesn't change infinitely from the very small to the very large. And it's easy to learn about certain systems by comparing them to another system, either above or below. The Oracle at Delphi said once, and it's one of my favorite quotes, to know the universe, know thyself. Because we are just reflections of that. Now, we're going to get down to the meat and potatoes here, with cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is just a name for a law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Now notice that this gentleman is knocking over one of these really big heavy dominoes. Nothing happens right away. He's not going to notice any effect until he sits there for a little while. Effects don't happen in real time. In putting something out, okay, into the universe, a cause, the universe will reconfigure itself, and then you will see the effect. That's how it actually works. Now, the plane of effects, I want you to conceptualize this, is where manifested realities have formed due to their underlying causes. The plane of effects constitutes that which has already occurred. As that which has already occurred cannot unoccur, it has become what is truth, or that which is. Human consciousness seems to be trapped upon the plane of effects, meaning that humanity as a whole remains ignorant of the underlying causes which they themselves have set into motion and lead to the self-inflicted suffering in their lives. Now we'll talk about causality. This is where causes are set into motion prior to manifesting as formed realities. This plane of causality constitutes the causal factors, the why, which underlie and precede all manifested things and events. All power to effect change lies in this plane. Human consciousness must move from the plane of effects to the plane of causality in order for human beings to understand the causal factors of the conditions which they are collectively manifesting in their lives. Only then will humanity be able to co-create their shared reality on a conscious level rather than an unconscious one. What do you do with your time? This is a very interesting question which I looked at on a regular basis. There are two spiritual currencies, okay? This is what you actually do have to spend. This can be something summarized by the analogy in the saying of spending time or paying attention. Whenever information or endeavors that we put our time and attention towards, we end up getting something in return for that investment. This return could come in the form of knowledge, understanding, skills, expertise, and empowerment if we invest our spiritual currencies wisely. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we spending our time? In front of the boob tube? Watching the big game? These are important, but are they going to make your life better? How about spending your time reading a good book? Or looking for the knowledge that's available at everyone's fingertips now? All right. We're going to look at the natural law expressions or exactly how it works. The recognizable workings of natural law in human life take place through 5 basic expressions. Each of these 5 expressions have a positive and a negative aspect, giving us a total of 10 overall natural law expressions. Okay? So we have a chart here. So to start with, oh, I love this. We're going to try it out. Okay. In the left column is just the expressions, okay? And that is, I will explain. And then you have 2 columns for what winds up manifesting as a result, okay? Now if you start with the generative polarity, we wind up with 2 possibilities. You can base your approach in love, which is consciousness, or fear, which is unconsciousness. Everybody should know that in a state of fear, your ability to think, your consciousness is pretty much shut down. That's why we are fed a steady diet of what to be afraid of today. Need to avoid that or overcome it in any way possible. Okay, then we have an initiating expression over here, or how it starts. It starts with knowledge. Bottom line. We can go to the other side and we can start with ignorance. See how that works out. Okay, we have an internal expression, what happens inside us. This will lead to sovereignty, which means you have internal monarchy, or you are ruling yourself. If you go to the other side, you have confusion. Basically, internal anarchy. You could also say nobody's at home. All right? For the external expression, what happens in society? Well, this leads to freedom on the positive side, or control, or enslavement on the negative side. Okay, the manifestation in society is we wind up with order, which is manifested good, or we wind up with chaos, which is manifested evil. All right, now it is noteworthy that you have to come down through this in columns, because if you start with love, you're not going to jump over to ignorance. You want to know, okay? By the same token, if you're starting with fear and ignorance, you are never going to wind up with sovereignty. So they do go down into columns. Okay. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Okay? It's Thomas Jefferson. But now I'm going to get into something a little bit more edgy. The only good is knowledge, and the only evil is ignorance. Think about that for a few minutes. Now, at the core of what I'm talking about is right versus wrong. In other words, these are actually woven into the fabric of the universe, something that we've never been taught. It's not right versus left, it's right versus wrong. A deep understanding of morality, the principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong behavior, lies at the very heart of natural law. Okay, so if we go down the right, it's also synonymous with it's correct. it's based in truth. It's moral, it's in harmony with natural law. These all go together. The actions based in it do not result in harm to other sentient beings. That is essentially the bottom line. Or you can go down the wrong side, which is incorrect, not based in truth, in opposition to natural law, and actions based in it result in harm to other sentient beings. Now, one of the big reasons why we're losing our rights is because almost nobody can define what they are, and we're going to do that right now. Rights are most easily understood when they are considered through apophatic inquiry. This process helps us to understand what a right actually is by understanding which actions are not rights because they cause harm to others. In other words, we have been created to have infinite possibilities, which means you have infinite rights. You can't list them and enumerate them, okay? But it's actually a very small list of the things that go against natural law. And we're going to look at that. This is a basic list. In murder, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you. It's somebody else's life. That's obviously a transgression, and so is assault, because you're harming somebody else's body, all right? You're doing damage and causing harm. Rape is you taking the free will choice from somebody who you sexually associate with, not to mention assault, obviously. Then you've got theft, which is taking something that doesn't belong to you. You've got trespass, which is entering somebody else's abode and depriving them of their sense of security, okay? That's something that they do wrong. You've got coercion, which is also taking away somebody's free will choice. Something that's not on this list, but I want to add to it, is honesty, okay, or the lack thereof. If you're lying, you're taking away somebody else's free will choice to make a correct decision based on the facts that were presented to them. So yes, we have to look at fraud. Basically, all of these things are theft, okay? You're taking something from someone else that is not yours. Okay. Now, natural law transgressions. Every harmful action that a human being is capable of taking is a form of theft, as we just said. Some form of property is always being stolen when a wrongdoing is committed. Now, life is a form of property. Your rights are a form of property. Your freedom is a form of property, okay? And they must be defended, and we're going to get to that. A living being or their property must have been harmed in order for a violation of natural law or a wrongdoing to have taken place. Any action that does not cause such harm is, in fact, a right. If there is no victim, there is no crime. This premise holds up very well under common law. At least it has in the past for as long as our courts will acknowledge it. There is no such thing as the delegation of wrong, or in other words, if a specific action is not a right for any individual, then that action cannot be delegated, granted, or licensed to any other individual or group and magically called a right. That action forever remains a wrong under natural law. Interesting concepts. Knowing your rights. Natural law always holds true, regardless of the population's belief systems. Like I said in the beginning, beliefs are irrelevant. This means that it does not matter how many people agree that a wrong can be turned into a right or that a right can be turned into a wrong. Such things can never be done in reality. People can only believe that they can claim such reversals and that it will magically make it so. Unfortunately, most human beings erroneously believe that it is morally possible for them to create and delegate rights which do not exist or take away rights which do exist. Now, for an interesting thought experiment, if you're trying to figure out right from wrong, it is useful to visualize a scenario of a world with only two people in it. If the behavior is either a right or a wrong in that instance, it remains a right or a wrong in any size population, regardless of how many people may believe otherwise. All right, so we're going to take our world, we're going to add two people, and we're going to have at least a little bit of fun here. Now, if one man says to the other, I'm going to take half of what we've earned and keep it for myself. Is that right or wrong? Obviously that's wrong. But half of what we earn, generally speaking, winds up in somebody else's hands, taken through force, coercion. That's theft. And I'm talking about taxes. Anybody that believes that taxes are a moral obligation hasn't looked at the world and its reality. I understand that about 85 to 87% of polls believe that paying taxes is a moral obligation. I have always believed that taxes are theft, and I feel morally obligated not to pay them. Makes me a little bit different. Then we've also got all of the things that you can do that would be a human right, the prohibitions, that they take your rights away. Okay? These are things like saying, well, maybe a good example would be a plant that you might like to smoke, which is fine, that is your right. But to have one man say to the other man, no, you can't do that, he's claiming ownership over that man's body. Okay? Something that is relevant nowadays is, what if one man wants to try an experimental cocktail inside the bloodstream of the other man? Obviously, he does not have that right. That's claiming ownership, in fact, enslavement, over the other man's body. He does not have that right. That also applies to the face diapers, which I started practicing on when they first came out because I knew this was headed to where it's headed. As a matter of fact, I was able to forecast everything that we've seen pretty much on day one. I said, this is it, because I had read all the white papers before it started and I knew what was coming. All right, and the final thing is licenses, permits, fees, all the things that you have to ask some, basically a parasitic entity called a bureaucrat, permission to do something with your own property, okay? All licenses are theft, fraud, and they have no basis in natural law, because even as an example, the Supreme Court has ruled that we have the right to travel with our own property from point A to point B. Some of you have even seen people exercising that right. And when somebody comes along and says you can't do that, no, actually you can. All right? But knowing your rights and knowing how to defend them, this also takes practice. That's a whole area of knowledge that we need to be learned. As a matter of fact, my buddy Carl is going to be looking at a whole bunch of that in the next presentation. I'm just getting to the principles here. Okay, natural law can essentially be reduced to a single spiritual principle, which is, do not steal. Don't take that that doesn't belong to you. Now we're going to get a little bit into defending your rights. There is a difference between force and violence, and a lot of people use them interchangeably, and they're not. Force is something that we all have the right to use. Violence is never permitted under natural law because you are violating a law with violence. All right? So, to follow through, human beings possess the natural right to defend themselves from violence with defensive physical force. A person who is accosted by violence possesses the right to stop the person who is conducting the violence from continuing to do harm to them, and with any amount of force necessary to stop the attack, up to and including deadly force. This is another area where a lot of people do not know their rights. We've been conditioned to call some guy in a goofy costume to come protect us, all right? That is actually a violation of natural law, which we will get to a little bit further down. We all have the right, and I would even argue the responsibility to be able to defend ourselves. I'm a strong advocate of gun ownership, but there's plenty of other options. And when I was talking about the right-brained belief systems, none of them talk about the right to defend yourself. Using force to actually say and stand up for yourself and your rights against somebody that's perpetuating violence on you. You have to do something about that. Okay, we're going to get to the bottom line question. Does violence become a right when government does it? Well, you can stew on that for a second. Getting back to what I was trying to say just a second ago. In the secret societies and a lot of the esoteric educations, you're going to have two pillars of enlightenment, all right? Everybody likes to think that they're enlightened, but take a hard look at whether you've got these two pillars. One is the sacred feminine, okay, the non-aggression principle. It also correlates to the side of the brain, the dominance that I was talking about before. The other side is the sacred masculine, which is the self-defense principle. That's basically been eradicated from society. So this is something that we need to know. For me, to very much shorten this, I would like to say it as do no harm and take no shit. Okay, that basically sums it up. Now, I'll talk a little bit about ownership, especially when we're living in a world where it's been promised that you will own nothing and be happy. It's a combination of grand theft and mind control. All right. The main reason our species continues to experience a systemic and growing loss of freedom is because we collectively do not deeply understand ownership, and we continue to commit and condone theft. This is being done on a grand scale just by supporting all of the powers that be as institutions which we have been taught have to be there. No, they don't. We will get further into that. To own a thing means that regarding that thing, an individual maintains rightful possession, control of usage, and responsibility. Now, as far as taking care of my approach when dealing with a mandate or somebody that pretends that they own me, okay? I will say that I have the rightful possession of this body. Okay? This is the body that I use because my spirit is connected to it. I'm using it every day, therefore I own it. That's why I own it. The control of the usage, yes. When I make a thought, it works. It does everything I want it to do. I have control of the usage of my body, and I am responsible for it. I am responsible for what goes into it and what does not go into it. That, I do believe, is the solid basis of challenging all these mandates. The religious exemptions are going down the toilet, and everything else that the lawyers are presenting as an option, they can just take away because you're begging permission from somebody that never gives you permission for anything. Okay? And they can just say no. And if you haven't figured out the agenda is to inject every man, woman, and child on this planet, they're going to say no whenever and wherever they can. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about conscience because that works very well with the difference between right and wrong. Very simply, the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong according to natural law. Now, in the full presentation, you get a lot into the etymology of words and where they come from, their Latin and Greek origins. But take my word for it, conscience just means common sense. That's all it means. And it shouldn't be confused with the exercise of conscience. Just conscience means knowledge. You know what's right and what's wrong. Free will choice of right action over wrong action, once the definitive knowledge and objective difference between right and wrong according to natural law has been acquired. That is the exercise of conscience. Okay, that's something that each individual is responsible for. Now, under natural law, there is a law that pertains to freedom. Simply stated as morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. Another way of stating this law would be to say that the presence of truth and morality in the lives of the people of any given society is inversely proportionate to the presence of tyranny and slavery in that society. If you want freedom, you have to build a society that's moral. A lot of people don't even see the immorality that is woven into society because that's just the way it's supposed to be, or so we've been taught. Okay. As morality declines, freedom declines, so we're going to challenge another basic premise. True freedom can never exist in a society that embraces moral relativism. This is the idea that there is no inherent and objective difference between right and wrong. So humanity can arbitrarily create or decide right and wrong for themselves. Talk about a trap. But that's pretty much the laws that we have. So we're going to look at a difference between natural law and man's law, which is a euphemism for government. Okay. Going down the list. Natural law. It's based upon principles and truth. It's inherent to creation. Harmonized with due to the knowledge and understanding. Natural law is also universal. It exists and applies anywhere in the universe, regardless of location. It's eternal and immutable. It exists and applies for as long as the universe exists and cannot be changed. Important concepts. We're going to compare it to man's law, which is based in dogmatic beliefs and are constructs of the mind. It's complied with due to fear of punishment, which is a very low level of consciousness. It differs with location based upon the whim of legislators, which is moral relativism. Changes with time based on the whim of legislators, more moral relativism. I could give you a whole bunch of examples, but moving right along. So, what does this mean for man's law? Okay, I'm going to do another thought experiment. If a particular man-made law is in harmony with natural law, then it follows logically that it is redundant, since it is stating a truth that is inherent, pre-existing, and self-evident. Therefore, it is both irrelevant and unnecessary. Now, if a particular man-made law is in opposition to natural law, then it follows logically that it is both false or incorrect and immoral and harmful, or in other words, wrong. Therefore, it cannot be legitimately binding upon anyone. So, to answer that question, man's law is irrelevant and unnecessary. Now, this is a very important page. For equality, everyone has the exact same rights. All men are created equal. You probably remember that phrase. No one has any more rights or any less rights than anyone else. Also, since rights are not created by humanity, and since they are the birthright of humanity, gifted to us by the creator of the universe, no human being or group of human beings is actually capable of granting rights to anyone else, nor is any human being capable of revoking rights from anyone else. Okay, we've been given a whole bunch of divide and conquer things that we can all obsess about, and pointing to how people are different from each other and stuff like that, and that's all been brought to us. We're talking about things like nationality, race, religion, and all of that, okay? These are tactics to divide us, so we can pit each other against each other, right? There is, however, one true divide. It separates humanity into two distinct types of individuals. The criteria for this divide is whether or not an individual believes in authority and therefore believes that there is legitimacy to slavery. Because as soon as you accept authority, they own you. And now you're acting like a piece of property to somebody else that owns you. That is slavery. You need to get that concept in your head. Now, for another word that has been obviously mischaracterized and misdefined in modern society is anarchy. Okay? One of the very few words that I'll go for the origins of in this presentation. From the Greek prefix an, it means without or the absence of. And the Greek noun archon, which is a master or a ruler. Anarchy does not mean without rules. Like I've already explained, they are inherent in nature. They should be common knowledge. It only means without rulers, without masters, or as I like to think, without parasites just sucking us dry. You don't need them, okay? But part of the brainwashing technique that humanity has been under is that one, through endless repetition, anarchy is chaos, anarchy is chaos. It's said over and over and over again until everybody believes that's what anarchy means. It does not. All it means is no masters and no slaves. Now, if you were to ask somebody, what does no masters and no slaves mean? They will say freedom. But now for the little mind game that's been played on us, we've been taught that freedom would mean chaos. Nothing could be further from the truth, but most people believe that we would have complete chaos if we had freedom. That needs to be challenged, okay? Now, we'll go a little bit further into statism. This is the brilliant idea that we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, imprison, harass, steal from, and kill people so that we can be protected from people who kidnap, harass, and steal and kill people. Brilliant logic. And yet our society operates on that. Okay, I've gotten into a tremendous controversy from the next slide, but hold off and let me explain. Conversely, an anarchist is one who knows there should never be legitimacy in authority or government because those terms are simply euphemisms for violence and slavery, which are always immoral and in opposition to natural law. Okay, so we've got Jesus Christ here saying, I'm an anarchist and most of my followers are statists. And I'll just take a very quick couple passages from the Bible which everybody's familiar with. Okay, who is the people that Jesus Christ was opposed to? Yes, there were some. You had the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They didn't see eye to eye on anything. He was very much opposed to those organized religions. Okay? Then he actually went to the temple one day and found all the money changers robbing everybody blind, charging excessive usury. What did he do? He flipped all of their tables over and he got them whipped out. And he ran them out of the temple. Okay? He could demonstrate a righteous anger and act on it. Something that most Christians don't do. And who finally put him to death was the police of his state. The Roman centurions, okay? Roman soldiers, whichever you want. It was the state. So you have Jesus Christ diametrically opposed to organized religion, the banking sector, and the government. And yet most Christians can't see that. Mark, and I would actually agree that these are fake-ass Christians. They have been mesmerized by a story taught to them and can't even read the scriptures themselves and draw a conclusion that, hey, wait a minute, none of these organizations are actually legitimate. All right. We do need to look at the fear of the possibility of chaos, because it is the fear of freedom, as I was explaining before with the anarchy, okay? And a lot of people sit there and say, it won't work out because of what I had said. Okay? I can tell you flat out, this is the death of imagination. Because a lot of people have imagined a society with freedom, and it is very doable. Okay? Those who believe that authority is necessary and that it must continue have actually been duped into believing that human slavery is necessary and that it must continue in order to prevent chaos. I would like to recommend an author named Larkin Rose. He wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. He reads it on YouTube in audiobook form, or it can be bought off his website, Larkin Rose. It's actually a pretty good book, and he will demonstrate why violence and slavery cannot prevent chaos. Simple violence and slavery are chaos. As we get to the end here, I wanted to look quickly at the order followers, because they're the root cause of what we're dealing with here. Following orders means doing what you are told to do without judging for yourself whether or not the action you are being ordered to carry out is right or wrong. And I think that's a pretty good definition of what it is to follow orders. If an individual is following orders, that individual cannot be exercising conscience, since by definition, exercising conscience means that one is willfully choosing for themselves right action over wrong action. You can multiply this onto any scale. Once you've got a bunch of mind-numb robots just blindly following orders, and it inevitably always leads to the same result. This is why I was just following orders is never a valid excuse or justification for immoral criminal behavior. And this lame attempt to abdicate personal responsibility should never be accepted as a valid excuse for such behavior. And I'm telling you right now, this isn't limited to the guys with the goofy costumes. I take this to waiters and waitresses, nurses and doctors. I take this to the people that are managing stores and establishments that I need to do business with. I've basically completely overrun the Home Depot with all of their mandates. They don't apply to me, and for over a year, I was the only one walking through that store every day with no face diaper, because I took on every authority that they put in front of me. That's what has to be done. You assist an evil system most effectively by obeying its orders and decrees. An evil system never deserves such allegiance. Allegiance to it means partaking in the evil. A good person will resist an evil system with his or her whole soul. Now, in going through this material, I started to figure out something that was always a mystery to me. How hasn't karma caught up with the powers that be? Because I do know cause and effect. I do know that for every reaction, everything that you do and put out into this universe, it's going to come bite you. Or going to give you what you need. And we're going to explore that for just a minute. The determination of who is ultimately at fault or deserving of blame for the commission of actions which resulted in harm or loss to others, okay? And it defines culpable. Hopefully we know what that means. Ask the question, who is more morally culpable, the order giver or the order follower? Okay? Now personally, I think the order givers, the satanic elite that, basically run everything. Why are they still there? That was the big question that I wanted to ask. There's a fairly simple way to figure this one out. We start at the bottom with a man, okay? Because we're going to use something that was manifested. He's carrying a 6-year-old daughter and going to oblivion. All right. We move up one scale and say, okay, the satanic guys are saying, I didn't cause that. And then you got the guys with the guns saying, my actions didn't cause that. Now that's the important word. It's underlined and capitalized. Actions. All right? That's what's relevant to what you put out in the universe. Who is lying it? Who is telling the truth here? The sad fact is, it's the guys with the guns that have actually caused what you saw there. The order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver, because the order follower is one who actually performed the action, and in taking such action, actually brought the resultant harm into physical manifestation. Order following is the pathway to every form of evil and chaos in our world. It should never be seen as virtue by anyone who considers themselves a moral human being. Order followers have ultimately been personally responsible and morally culpable for every form of slavery and every single totalitarian regime that has ever existed upon the face of the earth. This is very powerful. I have never had respect for certain segments of our society that pretend to rule over us. But a lot of people do. And I've always been taught, or at least they've tried to teach me, to have respect for certain classes of people, depending on the goofy costume. Okay? I was a kid that would actually, when beaten up by a nun in Catholic school, would punch her in the face as hard as I could. Because that's what it took to stand up for myself. I never saw these as good people. And I've had more run-ins with the police than I can count. But it's only recently that I'm not afraid of it anymore. Because I've taken the time to actually study the law and realize they're just a bunch of fraudsters running a scam. And once you can expose all the people in the courtroom for the felonies they're committing under their own laws, they're more afraid of you than I am of them. That's how I handle it personally. Okay. We have responsibility versus application. This is important. An individual's personal responsibility to choose right action over wrong action for themselves is always their own. One can only claim that they're abdicating personal responsibility for such choices to someone else. They can never actually be done in reality. More simply put, an individual is always responsible for their own actions. Most people erroneously believe that they can hand over their natural law right to defend themselves to another individual, group, or entity. In making such a false claim, they have attempted to abdicate a responsibility which always belongs to them and can never be given away. One way of saying that is when seconds count, the police are only a couple minutes away. All right, we'll talk about responsibility for a second. We're almost done. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither and will lose both. Yes, we are watching that happen. All right. This one I'm actually fairly good at, but I've noticed a lot of people aren't. The enlightened state of consciousness generated through the knowledge of natural law. A human being is finally able to speak the lost word, which is no. No is the word of all power. Only when we say no to those who would claim to be our owners, those who claim that it is they who will decide which rights we have or do not have, do we stop externalizing our power to anyone outside of ourselves, and in doing so, reclaim all our rights. Sadly, very, very few people in our world have the knowledge, the care, or the courage that is required to do this. This is why this all-powerful word is considered lost. Okay, you have to know your rights, because those that don't know won't say no. And I'm going to take about 2 minutes just to explain what I'm doing here. Teaching natural law to others. It's also known as the great work. The true great work can only be performed after one has already realized the truth regarding natural law and brought oneself into alignment with it. The true great work is what comes next. Now I have a great quote from Carl Jung. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. Yes, I've made a lot of enemies, but I've also made a lot of friends. But I stand in the truth. Ever since this whole thing started, a lot of customers asked me to comply with the mandates, and I said, call somebody else. I'm not doing it. And I was actually throwing. I got great doing that. But they've all been replaced in the annual report. Lots of bright smiling faces. I'm more than happy to deal with me on those terms. You have to educate and form a whole mass of people. That is the only sure reliance for preservation of our liberty. Yes, Thomas Jefferson did have a quote. Now, some of the obstacles that I've run into, I'm going to recite a couple of them because they're noteworthy. And these are people I generally walk away from because it's like a nut that's too hard to crack. The greatest enemy may not be ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. I have found that the more or better, quote-unquote, educated a person is, the harder it is to teach them anything, because they have all the answers, or so they believe, and they'll walk away. And then there's the emotional mind control that so many people are under. It states, if it's unpleasant, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to see it, and I certainly don't want to tell others about it. I'll just ignore it and it'll go away. Okay? Can't do anything with that either. I got this one guy that I know very well. Tom, you're so nihilistic. You know, I'm not a doomer and a gloomer because I do see a way out of this.
Can't hear you.
Okay, I will speak up a little bit.
Thank you.
We have to know who the real enemy is, and this is not it. This is a picture that was snapped at Bohemian Grove. Okay? All the Satanists having their rituals, and we can sit around and look at them and get angry over them. But that's not our enemy. This is our enemy, the sleeping masses. All the people that are just going along to get along. That is our enemy. Service to truth. Truth can never be destroyed. But humanity can be destroyed when we refuse to act in service to truth as her defenders. It is possible for us to co-create a positive outcome, but this can only be accomplished if we care enough to learn the truth ourselves and then develop the courage to continuously speak it to others. And developing courage is an art form. If you don't think you've got it, do what I did and watch a bunch of videos on it and practice, because that's the only place I've gotten it from. I was a wallflower only 10 years ago. I'm working on it. All right. Once that's done, it takes persistence. We are the vehicles by which truth operates in the world. Therefore, it is our shared responsibility at this time to help awaken others by continuously speaking the truth, even if we feel burdened by this task, even if it makes all of those feel uncomfortable. All right. A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as the gift of the magistrates. An assumption that needs to be challenged. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only have the law of nature for his rule. These are our founders. This guy was a fairly famous English alchemist, which is something that I've studied in great detail. Nature to be commanded must first be obeyed. That's a very important principle. And that's pretty much my prepared presentation. What we're going to do now is work on, I bet I've generated at least a few questions. And I'm prepared to take on whatever you think we've got for me. For the show of hands.
Want some water?
Thank you all for being here. Carl's going to work to set up the next one. Yes, speak up.
Can you go back to the slide with Gandhi on it and just hold that there, because I actually wanted to write down that quote. I've been doing a lot of writing, but that was too fast for me.
All right, that was too fast.
All of it was too fast, but I wanted to go.
Okay, all of this was, to answer your question, way too fast. I wouldn't expect any living human being to absorb everything that I just said, which is why I said at the beginning, we really need to go through this material. I do this kind of stuff very regularly, pretty much over and over. I actually sleep with headphones at night and audiobooks playing. Okay, now I don't use just this material, all right? This is just one example that I found that seemed to be pretty good in the context of the presentation. Okay, where I had something that you could read, that you could write down, okay? And it's relevant. Like I said, I actually took a little seminar. Me and my wife went down to Philadelphia, and the gentleman, Mark Passio, that did that original YouTube, was putting together a seminar on teaching natural law, which I went to. I was nowhere capable of this a couple of years ago when we did it, but he did give me the slideshow. He says, do whatever you can with it. Yes?
Tom, there was somebody asking about a book or a reference, and you said you'd come back to it, and I can't recall what it was.
The 1908 book.
Yes,
Kybalion.
Oh, the Kybalion.
spell it.
Do you know how to spell that, Debbie?
Yep.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes?
It's
Okay. My wife Deborah. She puts up with a lot of shit from me.
K-Y-B-A.
Say it again, say it again.
K-Y-I-O-N.
K-Y-B-A-L-L-O-N. I-O-N.
Yes. Some people know what I'm talking about, some don't. It's very, very interesting. If you're a scientist, it's over the top interesting because of the possibilities. Yes.
So when you were going through the principles of natural law, you mentioned the principles of gender. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Okay, gender is actually in everything in nature. It's like the masculine and feminine. As I had pointed out, on the two sides of the brain, you had the left side, which was the masculine, and the right side, which was the feminine, okay? And then all of the traits that go with that, okay? Masculine and feminine is basically the essence of creation, okay? And we are in creation. And you will have aspects of creation that can be defined more or less within the feminine side, okay, of caring, of emotion, okay, of, let's say, art. And all the things that are like emotionally based, all the things that we look, we can say, oh, what a beautiful building. Okay, that's the feminine. And somebody else can look at this and says, gee, what did it take to wire up all those lights in the ceiling? Okay, that's the masculine part of it. You have to combine the two to build anything. All right? That applies to the whole universe as well as yourself. So not to be too broad, but it will be explained in a heck of a lot more detail in that book that I suggested. Okay. Anyone else? Yes?
One is about the book and one is about what you said. Another book is with the Larkin Rose one.
Yes.
Can you tell me the title again?
Oh, The Greatest Superstition. Okay, he has a YouTube channel. And,
Can you please spell the name also? What was the author's name?
Larkin, Larken, Rose. You'll also find what got me introduced to his work, and to a huge extent, my exploration into this particular topic, was a YouTube video which you should look at. It's called The Tiny Dot. Write that down, okay? The Tiny Dot. We actually started a forum on a website called Dots as a result of somebody that posted that video. And what it basically explains is the disparagement between the teeny tiny dot where all of the power resides, and then it will show at scale the rest of humanity answering to this teeny tiny dot. It really points out the absurdity of the situation that we're in. That if we had any kind of cohesion whatsoever, that tiny dot would have no significance at all in our lives. I personally make sure it has no significance in my life.
And my actual question was, so you said maybe law is irrelevant and unnecessary, and I couldn't agree more. Are you going to talk to us about LGBT? Because, and maybe it's skipping ahead, but I feel like all this, we talk now on a spiritual level, we have to interiorize a lot, but it has helped me reading about the spiritual stuff and then hearing about what has been actually done, papers and, on the practical level in the courts, and it just makes it real.
Yes. Whatever the situation is, okay, I'm going to answer your question a slightly different way than you might hear in a lot of law groups, because a lot of people are looking for the template of the perfect form to fill in all the blanks and submit, okay? And without a thorough knowledge of what's on that form and can be thoroughly explained, that's useless, because you will be challenged on it, okay? What I like to do is just recognize that the entire system is evil. It is in a state of complete collapse. Now, I know they intend to replace it with something else, even more diabolical than the one we've got. But I don't actually work within that system, okay? A lot of people that know me know that I basically work for cash. I have no license to do anything, and yet I do things that anybody else would need to be licensed for, okay? When somebody calls me up, it's a blind call, and they say, they give me a list of things, yes, I can do that, Of course, you're licensed and insured. I says, no, I don't contribute to criminal organizations. They either love that or hate it. They either hang up or I'm hired. They know right up front where I stand on that, all right? That is the basis of my life. Now, for all of these systems where you've got jobs that are making demands, claiming that you are their property, all right? You need to get outside of that system. That is the bottom line, all right? I mean, another example would be they wanted complete subservience to go to the airport to fly to Colorado, all right? And what did I do? I wanted to go visit my daughter who lives in Denver. I got in my car and I drove there. I do whatever it takes to stay outside of their little system, all right? As far as education, homeschooling, it has to be done, all right? Schools as they are currently constructed are causing far more damage to our children than that could possibly be interpreted as help. What is happening though is, generally speaking, parents are just not lazy. I mean, lazy or not feeling responsible enough for their children. I used to basically counteract everything that my daughter was learning in school. In other words, it's homework time and we're going to tell you what was really true, as opposed to what they taught you at school today. Unfortunately, she's been away at school for 6 years now, something like that. And it's scary because she is completely surrounded by indoctrinated people. And unless you reinforce this on, a very regular basis, you'll lose it. Okay, it's like neuroplasticity. It just, you gotta get a firm anchor of oneself and what you believe in. And if that needs to be reinforced every day, week, or month, it is still very important to do that. Yes?
So, not necessarily asking you a question so much as sharing a question about the media in which you were sharing, which is following the natural law of mass above, so below.
Yeah.
When you're talking, as you were going along, there were several moments where I was wishing I had my 11-year-old here. Picking up much less to answer a lot of these questions and helping to think about things in simple ways. And then we got to the part about moral relativity. And I was like, oh, he'd see hypocrisy in me.
Say again?
He'd see hypocrisy in me because when it comes to dealing with things, I make arbitrary rules, as a parent,
I understand.
And so then, thinking about the fact that, the way that we have, where we have been and what we've grown with is all pervasive. And we might, like what you're sharing definitely connects to where my head is, but there are behaviors in me that are representative of the things that are wrong. And how to deal with that and being a parent, I just started reflecting on that and I thought it was interesting that was kind of what
You deal with it the best you can, all right? Now, when I first came across this particular line of knowledge, all right, and I found this particular video, like I said, it was 9 hours long. I had a teenage daughter and I made it required viewing. As a parent, I said, you need to learn this because you're going to be able to use it for the rest of your life. Okay? What happened? She was, I don't know, the end of middle school, beginning high school at the time, to put a time frame on it. Okay? She's now postgraduate going for a doctorate. I like to say I had something to contribute to that. Because it's far beyond. She's doing the whole thing on scholarships and fellowships. So it's like, wow. This does make a difference. It makes a difference in my life too. Like I said, I am not tied to any other person. If one person starts making demands of me, it's like, have a nice life. I don't want to deal with it. So these are the things that, most of this is a mindset, okay? I don't want to say that there's a particular combination of words or principles that you're going to have. And it takes practice. I don't get it right on the first try, all right? A lot of times I will be in a, let's say, dialogue with somebody that pretending that they own me. And I didn't get it all exactly the way I would, like, I should have said this, I should have said that. Okay, it's a learning experience. So I plan all those scenarios through my mind of all the things that I should have or could have said. That so the next time somebody demands something of me, I've been practicing. Let's see if I can do it this time. And it's a growth thing. It's an evolution thing. You just get better at it, right? But you have to know what you're working towards. I like the videos that I mentioned mainly because this guy has attitude. All right? And if somebody wants to learn attitude, it's a good place to learn it. Yes?
You just go through, let's say, your top video suggestions one more time.
I do a lot of videos for the genre that I'm talking about here, okay? I wanted you to see like the Mark Passio. This is actually the cover slide for the presentation that you will find on YouTube. And all you really have to do is write his name down and type it into the YouTube bar, okay? And when you get to his channel, you will very quickly see this particular thumbnail, all right? And click on that. Now, on his channel, it's the 3 parts. In other words, it's, you know, the breakfast session, morning session, afternoon session, and evening session. So I broke it in. There's also this video, and it's, you know, all connected together. I think it comes to 8 hours and 48 minutes. Nobody has time to sit through that, except me. Sometimes I'll put that. Yeah. Ask my wife. I get obsessed about certain things. I go from one, you know, thing to the next. But this has been with me for quite some time now. To answer your question a little bit more specifically, once you have the basis of this knowledge, I've used it as a measuring stick, okay? A tool for discernment. Because obviously if you go to YouTube or Google, you will find gazillion things to look at, to waste your time on, okay? You can identify if this is in line with what you're trying to learn very, very quickly once you've internalized the basic principles here, okay? So for my own research into, and it doesn't matter, it can be any area, it can be astrology, it can be alchemy, it can be, you know, electronics and stuff like that. I can learn very quickly which narrative they're following. And I have a particular interest in one narrative. So I can, you know, basically say, no, that's not it. And then poof, I wind up with solid gold. Okay, that's going to be different for everybody here. All I'm offering you is the measuring stick that you can use to decide that for yourself. Because ultimately, we're all learning to think for ourselves, as opposed to being taught something, you know, like what to think. And I'm not trying to do that here. You do need to do your own research, yes.
I would not like to make a real license or enhanced license for my driving permit. What do you have and how?
All right. I have, probably, last week I got a ticket for driving without a license, which I'll be taking to court. Now the funny thing is I actually do have one, all right? But I didn't have it on me. As a matter of fact, I don't have one on me right now. I have a common law card, which under common law, there is a right to travel, right? Except that the monkey with the goofy costume and the gun that, you know, challenged me for not having a license, he's too stupid to deal with, and I don't deal with assholes with guns, right? I will take that to the court. I have a driver's license that is the only license I have, okay? It is essentially an extortion racket. But I am paying the extortion for the right to get, let's say, from my house to here, unfettered by some shithead with a gun, okay? Leave me alone. I've paid my fees to the state. That is the only concession that I personally make because I have lost cars. They've been heavily damaged. I've been stuck in jail, okay, for not complying with all of these motor vehicle and safety traffic laws. And I did not originally know how to challenge any of them, okay? I am way better at it now, so I'm not worried about it. But that was a whole area that I needed to learn, okay? He's gonna go into that. By the way, I probably are nearly done because you're gonna touch on a lot of this in your presentation. Okay, I'm gonna cede the floor to Carl because we only actually at the halfway point, believe it or not. There's a lot to go. So. We're gonna be here for quite a while, so if you've got questions, just ask me.
I think we're doing a break, right?
Yeah.
Are we doing a break?
Yeah.
All right. Let's do a break.